think Sanjay and I, we had the same dilemma of, is this going to be a panel discussion where we could just shoot our mouth based on the topic in currency, or was it going to be a speaking slot? But hopefully it ended up being so as a speaking slot, so no poetry to narrate, but some context in terms of what it is from an experience perspective. Almost a decade ago, right, when you talked IT, there was a large conversation that talked about IT becoming a utility, right? People, and which is exactly what was getting narrated out here, because it doesn't stand out in itself. But then if you're talking about startup, if you're talking about funding in non-IT sectors, so my dissection of that would primarily be about sectors that don't use so much of technology, if you will. So you're talking about, which don't depend on technology in toto. Of course, today, even if you're shipping one product from one place to another, it goes through a certain supply chain, logistics pipeline, where there is technology intervention and all that. But then if you assume that IT is a utility and you talk about the topic of funding in non-IT sectors, you're referring to sectors that don't use IT as an input, if you will. So I'll go a bit in that direction, if you will. And it's even more interesting because non-IT sectors are a little removed from the smoke screen that IT sectors throw up there, right? The smoke screen of valuation, the smoke screen of hypergrowth, the smoke screen of future growth in many of those dimensions, right? In a non-IT sector, you've got some of those very fundamental principles that apply, which means that you are a pathetic businessman if you are making a loss. But many of the companies that run on technology and IT, if you will, have 1,000, 2,000 crore losses lined up, right? So from that perspective, the non-IT sectors respect a little more in terms of the fundamentals of business building, if you will. So funding non-IT sectors will ultimately be a tad more prudent for an investor, though we are talking about much of the Silicon Valley where it started off and rest of it. So some of the investments that I've worked with have been largely in the media tech spaces. So like Sanjay was talking about. And out there are very clear matrices to kind of evaluate growth. And there are also smoke screens which kind of exist in terms of future growth. In media tech, for instance, you're talking about building user bases, potentially, we heard about buyouts, preparing an organization for buyouts or stake come-ins and things like that. IT sectors typically have a lot of metrics that you can chase. But the non-IT sectors work on the very fundamental of business building, which is a P&L, which talks about, are you making money in every investment? Are you building your customer base? Are you capturing new markets? And some of that. So taking a step back, funding in non-IT sectors, I would imagine, is a little more challenging because it is not easy to put in perspectives and hyper growth points out there, right? So if Pepperfry, which we heard this morning, that fantastic presentation, were to be in a non-IT space, if it were to be a non-e-com player, would it have grown 12-fold into its third year, right? But then, on another aspect, it could be a biryani joint or something else. Somebody who's, I was talking to Hari, who's doing something in the CHANDRASEKHAR space, or any of those traditionally non-IT spaces, then there is a critical articulation to actually show that you will need to kind of invest that in. So again, from a fund investment perspective, the non-IT sectors demand a little more inflow because for growth, you will need growth capital that is of a very different direction altogether, right? So either you need growth capital to support your inventory, not so much about technology, because on the other side, technology is also sometimes a money guzzler, right? I mean, you start investing in platforms. Again, it depends. Are you using technology as a platform, or are you using technology as an enabler, right? I mean, a lot of IT sectors, if you will, or IT-driven companies use technology as a platform unto itself, right? It could be medical, it could be healthcare, it could be pharma, it could be retail, it could be hospitality or whatever, right? It could be travel, any of that. But then there is a different dimension that goes into the whole thing. And the other piece is also about, I think one of the things that people don't talk about it so much is the challenge, and which I find in the overall environment very challenged, at least from a startups ecosystem perspective, is compliance. I feel that a lot of the the IT-driven companies are hugely vulnerable to compliance, are hugely vulnerable to data breaches, are hugely vulnerable to downtimes, if you will. So a few system crashes, a few ransomware attacks, and the entire ecosystem can keep crumbling down. As opposed to non-IT sectors that oftentimes kind of protect themselves from some of these challenges. So going again a step back to this whole concept of funding in non-IT sectors, I think my takeout on that would be some of those very simple fundamentals. Non-IT sectors would look for fund investments that are a product of their P&L, which basically means, are you making money in your transactions? How are you building? How are you expanding? And how are you capturing markets? And is there an innovation out there, right? I mean, somebody was in the morning talking about there's got to be a sense of originality in terms of your idea. It could be a simple, chai shop, or it could be a furniture or a biryani joint or anything else. But then there has to be a level of innovation. And when non-IT sectors can articulate levels of innovation, then they've got a clear path to success, if you will. Now, again, in terms of, for instance, one of our investments was a company called Alti Green, which is in the green tech space. Or if you look at it, it's about a particular product that was getting created out there, which would significantly make your car more fuel efficient and everything else. Or it could be in the media, in the e-commerce space, where are you talking about e-commerce being a platform dependent, or are you talking about the tech being an enabler of e-commerce, right? I mean, there's a big divide. Is basically an e-commerce a supermarket thrown on the internet, or is e-commerce internet commerce, if you will, right? So there are some of those perspectives to it, but oftentimes when e-commerce is a supermarket thrown on the internet, which would be truer to the fundamentals of business. For instance, one of our investments is a company called Your Doorstep. One of the things that the CEO there, Dinesh Malpani, who's also a good friend, talks about all the time is how could companies survive when they are making a loss in every transaction, right? And they end up with $2.5 billion fundings after that, right? So, and continuously, but then there's only so much market that you can keep acquiring. There's only so much that you can keep building. So if you kind of take it back, every business has a set of fundamentals. So funding per se, tech or non-tech, IT or non-IT, always will need to chase the path of simple business prudence and fundamentals. And so that is basically my submission in terms of funding in non-IT sectors will be as commonsensical, maybe a tad more commonsensical than funding in IT sectors, because IT has this, this aura of being tech, and a couple of kids who just graduated out of IITs and B schools, come and wax eloquent on a particular concept, but then fundamentals just aren't there, as opposed to fundamentals existing in the non-IT sectors when you cannot pull smokescreen out there, and you'll kind of need to hold a lot of jigsaws together. So that is my submission.